So now we're going to look at various methods of hand sharpening. So first job, as usual, loosen the bar nuts or bar nut, release the chain tensioner because you want the chain to be free flowing. Before we go any further, let's just have a look at exactly what chain are we sharpening and what should it look like. Well, we're doing 73 and it's LPX. And here we can see that this is a round ground chisel chain, so it's a full chisel chain. The file size we want to use is 732, 5.5mm, and we're actually looking for an angle of 25 degrees rather than 30. That's interestingly just noticed on this as well that it doesn't give us the side plate angles. On the steel, back of the steel boxes that chain comes in, it actually tells you the side angle as well. But there you go, you can't have it all, I suppose. I've been told to ignore this 10 degrees lead in. So you can see up there, it's the angle that the file actually meets onto the chain. And it's best just to always file your chains to 0 degrees, so you file them flat. Here's a picture of what the chain looks like when it's brand new. And this gives us a good idea of what it should look like. Most full chisel chains have quite a sharp angle here, the side plate angle. And this angle here is usually 60 degrees or thereabouts. I mean, we all want to get it sort of as close as possible, but you're never going to be perfect. And you can see with this full chisel chain, it's got a really lovely sweeping curve all the way out to the top. And it's this, again, it's that very point that does most of the work with a chainsaw chain. You can have everything else sharpened and lovely. If that point isn't there, it's going to still cut like a dull chain. And that's often the reason as well why chisel chains are so quick. Everything is focused into that point, which gives you much faster cutting. On the downside, if you hit some grit and things like this, it's much less forgiving on the chain, and so full chisel chains will dull a lot faster than the semi-chisel, micro-chisel style chains. And they're also harder to sharpen in some ways because you've got to try and get this lovely hook to the chain without it being undercut and also without it laying back, which we'll look at later. So starting to look at the hand filing options you've got for chain. You've got various round file holders. That particular one's the plastic Oregon one with a round file in. That's the Oregon round file with a holder and guide. And on these guides you'll notice that there's angles written. They have 25 degrees there. Up here you have 30 degrees. There you have 25 degrees. There you have 30. And that's to give you a hand getting the angles correct. Here's Steel's version of the holder, wooden handle. It's got a 10-degree witness mark there. And so this one's designed for 3/8 chain and a 5.2mm file. There's another 10 degree there. So it's almost like the 10 degrees are for ripping chain. Further down you've got 30 degrees there, and for when you do the other side 30 there. And this is quite a new device. It works quite well, and it's designed to take down the depth gauges as you sharpen the chain. Now some people don't actually use a guide, they just use a round file and a holder, and so we'll have a look at doing that now. Personally I think it's very difficult on a video to show you how exactly to sharpen a chain, but the number of strokes depends upon how damaged the tooth is. I mean, we're just touching up this chain, so a couple of strokes is fine. The action of the file is a push on one side and a pull with the other. So we line this is just with a freehand file. So we line the file up like so. Now that chain's just a tiny bit loose for filing, so let's tighten her up a bit more. Let's do if he's still... That's better. So again, I'm sort of pushing through with one and twisting it lightly at the same time. Now the difficulty with using just a round file on its own is that there's more chance of making an error on the chain, so particularly with this method it's much easier to undercut the tooth and leave a beaked tooth. Now this particular tooth, I'm going to deliberately undercut it so you can see exactly what it looks like when you have too much of a hook or too much of a beak. Give him a little clean up there. This is the tooth I've just deliberately undercut and taken a picture of. So initially it still looks like a chainsaw chain tooth, but if we actually look at the side plate angle now, it's more like, I'd estimate between 35 and 40 degrees. Let's call it 40 degrees. When you undercut the tooth like this on a full chisel chain, you leave that point here unsupported, and so this point is therefore much more susceptible to blunting. So initially this chain will cut more aggressively and less smoothly, but it will still cut, but you'll find the chain will not stay sharp for very long, and that's because that angle is too shallow and there's too much of a beak to the chain. There's too much hook there, and the point here is unsupported. It's quite tricky to see, but if we flick backwards and forwards between the correctly sharpened chain and this one, I don't worry about saving that. So here we have the undercut tooth, and there we have the correct tooth. Let's just zoom in here a minute. Here you can see a nice even sweep, and again it's a 60-degree angle here. On the undercut beaked tooth, this point is projecting right out here. It just looks slightly wrong, but it's recognising the difference between the two, which one is the correct one and which one isn't. So that's what happens when you undercut the chain. you leave too much of a hook. This point here is unsupported. The chain will cut aggressively to start with and dull quickly. Now I'm going to take this tooth, so it's got a... So rather than the file being where it's supposed to be, it's riding too high. This time we're looking at a tooth that has been sharpened with either too large a file or the file is too high in the file holder, or just incorrect technique really. So now, instead of having a hook projecting outwards, the actual tooth is laid backwards. So you haven't got any sort of a point or anything projecting out, when really the angle of this chain should be sweeping round. It should look more like, slight exaggeration, but it's something like that. So this in some ways is worse than having a beaked tooth, because when the tooth lays back like this, it will barely cut wood at all. So it's one to look out for. If that's what your chainsaw teeth look like, you need to adjust your technique or look at the equipment that you're using. And it's much more likely to happen this on the smaller chains rather than the larger ones. So now we'll start looking at filing the chain using the filing guide. Now from the chart earlier, we could see that 25 degrees is what we want to be filing this chain to. And I've got this here on the file holder for the Oregon. So again, it's a push-pull action. So rather than just blindly filing, have a look every now and again to make sure that you've got the correct angle, that there's not too much hook on the tooth, and that it's not sloping backwards. It doesn't matter how you get this tooth sharp. So after you've finished filing one side of the chain, you then turn the chainsaw around to do the other side. And we're going to do this with some other filing guides.